Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Robam, joined by my co-host, Jacob Hare. And today we are very lucky to be joined by former NHL player for the Buffalo Sabers and the Ottawa Senators, Rob Ray. Rob, thank you for being here.
Thanks,
No
Rob.
problem, gentlemen. No problem at all. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Prior to his NHL career, Rob played in the OHL for the Cornwall Royals. Rob was drafted in the fifth round of the 1988 NHL entry draft by the Buffalo Sabers, where he spent 14 seasons prior to finishing his career in Ottawa, where he spent 2 seasons. So, Rob, let's get right into this interview. We got to ask you, you have been well known for your penalty minutes throughout your career. Where did that side to your game come from? How did that sort of develop?
Well, when I was a kid, I never played that way, obviously. And, when I was in minor hockey, you'd score 200 points a year type thing. That was the kind of player you were. But as you progressed up in the rankings, like I played till I was 14 in my hometown. And then the next year I played junior B and then tier 2 junior A and then 3 years of major junior A. And back then it was a much more physical game. So everybody was kind of expected to play that way, and everybody did, whether you're the superstar on the team or, the guy that's all you did. So everybody did it. Going into junior, the OHL was a very tough physical league. You got a few fights there. But everybody just kind of – that was the way the game was played then. And then when I made the step to the Sabres after being drafted, went to training camp, then got sent to the American League, which is Rochester. My coach there, John Van Boxmeer, said, hey, they're looking for somebody in Buffalo to do this job. Are you interested in it? And I'm like, show me how. Mm-hmm. And that year I got, I think, 46 fighting majors and 446 minutes of penalties, but that's what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to learn to play that role. And a year later, I get my shot. So it was all worth it. It was a tough job, probably more tough mentally than it was physically a lot of nights. But, it was well worth it. When you get the opportunity to fulfill your dream like that, any way you can do it, any way you can get there, I might not ever have made it just by my skill alone. So the door was open, so I took full advantage of it and did what I had to do, and it turned out real well for me.
So most of your career, you were an enforcer. Did your style of play ever change throughout your career, or you stayed as an enforcer your whole career?
Well, it was different in the early days. Okay, in the late 80s and 90s, you just didn't go play that role. You were expected to play. You had to be productive, not maybe on the offensive side, but you had to be reliable defensively. You had to be able to chew up some minutes and all that kind of thing and play. You just didn't sit. And as the years went on, that role kind of turned into that guy only playing a few minutes a night. And, it kind of, as they started kind of weeding it out of the game a little bit. But no, when you first played, you were playing 10, 12 minutes a night, every game, expected to play and be responsible. And, I think I got 8 goals a couple of times, in a season. So you had to be able to do it all. But as you progress in your career, you get kind of put into a role. And unless you're a superstar player, they're going to start forming you and grooming you to be, whether a penalty killer, whether it's a stay-at-home defenseman, maybe, whatever role they need to fill. That's what they're going to kind of groom you into. And when you get to the NHL level, you've got to do something very, very good. One thing very, very good, and everything else pretty good, and to survive. So, you just, a lot of the time it's not your choice on that direction sometimes. There could be guys that were the greatest offensive players in junior, and as they get playing into the pros, they may turn into a defensive forward. They may turn into a shutdown guy. They may turn into, a PK specialist type thing. So, it's whatever the organization that you're with wants at that time, and you're able to adapt to it and play, that helps you stick around and you survive that way. So some guys can't make that transition. Some guys, they were totally offensively minded when they play junior, and they come to the pros and it's a different thing, and they don't produce the same way, and then they can't change their game to become a defensive, responsible player, then they don't stick around. So Like, I think in most cases, and like I say, unless you're that superstar guy, you've got to be able to adapt to what they want. And if you can't, then, you don't stick around.
So you mentioned transitioning to fill a specific role in your
Yep.
when you make it to professional hockey. As far as adjusting to the speed of the play from playing in the OHL and then the AHL, eventually the NHL, what is that adjustment like?
It's huge. I think every step you make is that one step faster. And back then I had a full year in the American League to kind of get your speed up, and that's where the American League back then was more of a grooming league, and that you produced players, a lot more players I think then than they do kind of now. So it wasn't the wins and losses so much in the American League. That the coaches were expected to produce players. So they, worked on each individual of what their weaknesses were, what they needed to do better to get to the next level. And I don't think quite that emphasis put on it quite the same now. They got specialty guys that the teams send to be, they work on all that kind of stuff, but they're not there every day. And, they're in and out and they're helping, they're gone to see junior kids. They're all over the place. So you don't get that time, with those coaches. But back then they did. And so it was a lot different. So when you talk about the speed, yeah, when you make that step even from the American League to the NHL, it's a huge, huge difference. And everybody talks about the speed of the game now and how fast certain guys are. Well, that's always been there. There's guys that are so fast back when I played. Pat LaFontaine and Alexander Mogilny and Phil Housley and all these kinds of guys. They were unbelievable skaters. The only difference was back then there's a red line, so it slowed the game down. So these guys couldn't even use their speed to their advantage a lot of the times because there were so many two-line passes and all that kind of thing. So you noticed it when they took that red line out. Now it's kind of frustrating sometimes when everybody talks about how fast everybody is and how fast the game is now. Well, it would have been that fast then too if the rules were the same, then as they are now. And I'll tell you, I would match up any of those guys against the top skaters in the NHL now. And that's just, a couple of guys that I had a chance to play with. There was guys on every team like that.
So is there a player in the NHL today that reminds you of yourself in your playing days?
No, not really. I think my style of game is so far gone out of the game now. You still got a couple of guys that, that I think, Ryan Reeves, guys like that would be able to survive back then playing that role. But most guys now that think and pretend they're tough out there, they would have been destroyed 25 years ago because they wouldn't have been able to handle it. It was just a totally different game back then. So, it's unfortunate because in my mind, it's a part of the entertainment factor in the game.
Yeah.
People, it's part of our game. It's been there since day one. And, it's not as if the NHL is ever going to say, hey, there's no more fighting. It's just going to slowly weed its way out anyways, because the kids coming up through now, they're not taught to play that game. They're not expected to play that game. So they don't know how to play it when, that situation comes up. And a coach is never going to coach that way anymore because if something ever happened, he's going to be in huge trouble. So it's just kind of going by the wayside on its own. It's unfortunate because I think it's a huge tool that you can use to your advantage and motivation in changing, the pace of the game. It can change the way teams are attacking you. There's so many things that can be changed by playing that physical game that most people wouldn't even understand that is so far gone now that you'll probably never, ever see it again.
So the Rob Ray rule.
Yeah.
Tell us, what was your reaction to learning about that sort of rule change to fighting?
I just thought it was BS at the time. It was like, are you kidding me? That what I was doing and some other guys in the game, it had that big of an effect on everybody that you've got to change a rule for. So at the time, it was like, what the frig? It was like, but, as time's gone on and you're out of the game now, you look back and, I kind of laugh at it now because maybe you left your little bit of a mark on the game that, things were changed because of something you did, that it's kind of cool that you're connected to it and maybe the main reason why it happened.
Yeah.
So, it was, did it affect? No. I think when I was younger and less experienced, it worked to my advantage. But as you got older and were more comfortable doing it, then it didn't matter if the jersey came off anymore. You were comfortable doing it, and the style of fighter changed as your career went on too. They weren't as mean and tough and nasty and all that at that point. So actually fighting got easier as you progressed in your career because that player started to change already.
Who would you say was the toughest player to fight during your playing career?
I'll tell you what, I always say the guy that I had the most trouble with was Joe Kosher. Joe hit so hard. Every time he'd touch you, it hurt. And you had to be so careful with a guy like that because he could knock you stiff in a second. And you had to be so careful and thinking all the time, trying to avoid that direct blow that he was going to give you. But yeah, he was a tough man, and like devastating punches that just nobody that I fought hit as hard as what Joe did. And I was even in a fight with Tony Twist once, and he got me in the side of the head right here, and the pressure of that punch pushed my eye through an orbital bone, and my face filled up for the air for 9 days. But still, that punch, yeah, it hit me in the right spot and it had an effect, but still it wasn't as hard as what Joe Kosher would have hit you previous.
Did you ever fear anyone going into a fight, or you always felt like you?
Yeah, I think you had to have a little fear, because I think you had to be able to turn that switch on and off. That you could be sitting there and everything's going fine, you're playing the game, and then bang, something happens where you need to address it, or the coach gives you the wink to take care of something, that you had to all of a sudden just go from happy-go-lucky to not angry, but put yourself in a position mentally where you could be to go and do what you had to do. So I as I got older, was able to do that pretty easy. You could flip that switch pretty easy to get yourself into those frame of mind that you had to go out and deal with what you had to do. But in a lot of cases too, you didn't want to go into it all half-cocked. You didn't want to go in there enraged, because you don't think when you're doing that. When you got involved with somebody, you had to make sure that you knew what was going on. You were thinking straight. You knew exactly what this guy was going to do. You knew what you wanted to do. You'd be able to have to take a couple punches to give what you had to do. So, there's a lot of things that go along with it. It's just not over. You just drop your gloves and go at it. Those kind of guys did not survive. So you had to, be a little more under control, but still get yourself ramped up to that level of, I got to get this guy, or, you got to make something happen.
So you were obviously a successful fighter in your career. Do you have any boxing background or maybe kickboxing background?
No. One summer I had a buddy back home that it was a boxer, and I worked with him a little bit, and it was good, but it's totally different. It's totally different than what you're doing on the ice. And I think one thing that I really took away from him, guy's name was Patty McWilliams, and he taught me how to punch, not just with your shoulder, but with your hips. Get your hips into it. Twist your waist while you're punching, and it gives you more leverage. And that helped a ton. But in hockey, a lot of it is, your balance and, getting your feet wide enough apart where you're going to be able to be sturdy. And if the guy's tugging on you, you're not going to fall forward, fall back. And balance was a huge, huge part of it. And then obviously when you're hanging on to the other guy, it's the leverage of, pulling him at the same time you're punching, kind of the same time, just kind of bring them both together. And it kind of pulls him off balance a little bit. He's lunging forward, and that's when you were trying to do it. So I'll tell you what, a lot of people think there's not much to it. It's pretty technical. Anybody that did it right and did it well, because I think anybody you talk to that was successful at it at this level for a long period of time would pretty much tell you the same thing.
So one award that you won in your NHL career was the King Clancy Memorial Trophy.
Yeah.
What was it like to be awarded that?
Oh, it was great. To be recognized by your peers of what you're doing away from the game, then it was awesome. I look at it, and guys can win awards for things they've done on the teams as individuals and all that kind of thing. But this one kind of sets you aside from that a little bit too. That it's you giving back, you helping out with others, you giving your time and making sure that everybody else's life around you is as good as what yours is. So, I appreciated it. And I think that people in this town totally appreciate the work you do over the years, and you still do it. I run our alumni now, and we're still highly involved in, a lot of things around town, and guys love getting out and doing it. And, I'm still doing things now at 52 years old that, I was doing at 19 years old, dealing with the same people. And it's just fun. And you know what? Now when I'm doing it, I'm getting my kids involved. And, guys that I played with are getting their kids, and their kids are getting their kids involved. So it's just like, it's so cool, because a lot of times it's so great to get your kids out and see the other side of it, see what the other side, the way they live and what things they have to deal with. And, kids in the hospital that don't know any different. They've been there since day one, and, dealing with their families, how they have to feel with the pressure and everything of dealing with a sick child. So I think it's great for the young kids to get out and see it. And I think that's the advantage now. When I was doing it back then, I wasn't married, didn't have the kids. Now it's great that you can get them out and kind of show them what it's all about. And hopefully they continue to do it on their own.
So you stayed in Buffalo after your post-playing NHL career, and you became a broadcaster. What was the transition like from player to broadcaster?
It was hard. It was very hard, because it's not an easy job to go in there and have something to talk about all the time, to say the right things. You're watching the game and you're expected to explain what happened. You're going to see a replay most cases. You got to explain there what they did right, what they did wrong in a short time frame, because you've got to have it all done before the puck's dropped and, the play continues. You got guys talking in your ear all the time. You got the guy in the truck saying, hey, there's a commercial coming up, or no, we're going to do a paid sponsor here. So there's always something going on, plus trying to watch the game and stay focused on that and what's going on, and be able to have something to talk about every time that whistle goes, because the whistle goes and it's dead air, then they're in your ear to, come on, let's go. So you're always thinking and trying to plan ahead. So you kind of have a couple things ready that if nothing happens in the game, that, okay, next whistle, okay, I'm going to jump on this. I'm going to talk about this. And then as soon as that's done, you're thinking of the next whistle already, of what you're going to have to talk about. And some nights when things aren't going well, it's hard. You try to direct it in a totally different direction. And working with Rick Generette here, it's awesome, because, he understands that part, and that's what he taught me, that, you just don't say something to say something. If it's not something good, just don't say any at all. But in most cases, if it's bad, take it in a direction away from the game. Take it into some other way of telling a story or something like that kind of buys you some time, or the guys time, to get things back going again on the ice, and they get something positive to talk about. And you don't always want to talk about the negatives that are going on the ice, because we deal with these guys every day. We're around them. You travel with them. You're with them all the time. Yeah. And the last thing you want to do is start saying, the mistakes that are made on the ice, and this guy, it's, that, and he should have done this. And because the problem is too, they hear about it. If they don't hear you say it, their girlfriends, their wives, their family members, or somebody, and they don't hesitate to come up and say, I heard you said this about me. I'm like, yeah, is it true? And he's like, most of the time it's like, oh yeah. And I said, they also hear the way I backed it up with a couple positives to kind of direct it away from that. Kind of in our business, if you're going to say something negative about a guy on your team, your players are what I'm talking about. The opposition, it doesn't matter. But if I'm going to say something about Jack Eichel, that he made a mistake on the ice, then I'm going to back it up with a couple of great plays that he made previous to it. Should have done something a little different here, but then he'd come out of it with this fabulous play right here. Look what he did here. So yeah, if you got to throw a negative out there, you back it up with a couple positives.
So talking a little bit about Sabres hockey for next season. Unfortunately, they didn't qualify for the NHL's return to play. But what do you think needs to change for them to be successful next year?
No, I think that just the maturity of them being a little bit older. They got a lot of young guys that are pretty good. And, not Jack and Sam. They're not young kids anymore. But, Olsen's not a young kid. But you got Yoki Haru on the back end, who's really going to be really, really good. Darlene's is going to get better and better all the time. And, they got some young kids that, your fingers are crossed that Tage Thompson can come back and, be productive. You also Casey Middlestad, a kid like this, you got to get him to where they expected him to be. He's struggled since he's got here, but I think he was forced in a little too quick. And maybe the time he spent in the American League last year is going to help him. I think they got to figure out what their goaltending is going to be moving forward. But I think a little more depth on the offensive side. There's some guys that had tough years. Skinner had a tough year, only I think 11 goals or something like that. So there's a lot of guys that didn't play up their potential last year that they need to make sure they can get to where they need to be, because you can't just sit back and rely on Eichel all the time. He needs a support staff as well. And I think our first line did a very good job this year. Our fourth line this year with Larson and Girgensson and Oposo, they did a fabulous job. Our D were, decent all season long. Goaltending let them down at times, but I think a little more offensive punch, a little better defensively in their own zone, and a little more maybe jam up front. Maybe some couple bigger physical guys that can help distract away from what happens is a lot of teams, especially on the road, they'll concentrate on Jack, they'll concentrate on Darlene, they play them physical, they hit them every chance they get. But if you got guys in your team that are going to do that to the opposition, it kind of distracts them from doing it to your star players. And I think we're in a situation where we don't have enough guys right now that are aggressive enough physically to take that attention away from the star players. And by doing that, it gives Jack and these guys a lot more room to work out there.
So you mentioned a big physical guy, Wayne Simmons, who was added by Buffalo from New Jersey at the trade deadline. He sort of in the later stages of his career, he's not really the goal scorer that he was maybe with Philadelphia. Do you want to see him maybe step up in that role?
I'd love to see them bring Wayne back. I think that Wayne needs a contract, but I would love to see him come in here, because what Wayne does too, he's respected within the room, and what he says they listen to. And Wayne's a little more old school than probably anybody in that room, and he won't hesitate to to call guys out, to push buttons and make guys accountable. So I think more than anything, I think what he could bring to this group within the room, off the ice, would mean way more than what he would bring on the ice. But I appreciate the way Wayne plays. Always liked the way the guy has played throughout his career. Wish we had him a few years earlier. When he was going, he was a hell of a player, and he was a very well-respected guy within the game. So, but I think he's still got lots in the tank. I think he can still be a very productive, third-line guy for you here, and kind of bring a little bit of that stability on the ice.
Is Linus a franchise goalie, in your opinion?
Linus Ullmark, he shows that he can have good nights, and then there's nights when he kind of lose it a little bit. I think the biggest thing for Linus is staying mentally sharp and mentally tough every night, and understanding that when you're put in that position, there's a lot of weight on your shoulders, and you got to play through things. You got to play through when you're banged up, hurt a little bit, and pay that price. And you just hope as guys get a little older and get a little more experience, they understand that. And, I think Linus can do a heck of a job for this team. Do I think he's a guy that's going to be their number one guy for the next 5 or 6 years? I'm not sure about that.
Rob, really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much for your time.
Guys, no problem. It was an honor to be on with you, and you did a great job.
Thank you for being on. We really appreciate it.
No problem, gentlemen. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Stay safe.